So without any further ado, I introduce Terry Parish.
Thank you, Mark. They make it sound like I know what I'm, or at least I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. But I'm going to start this one off with a little bit of fun. I was thinking about how to get this thing rolling, and I know in your jobs on a routine and daily basis, you've got so many things going on. You probably got 14 different hats you wear. You got too many different things to worry about and all kinds of things that you had to be concerned with. And sometimes you kind of get so entailed and tied up into some things that you may forget some of the other things you've got to do. And my little video to start with is actually a test. If you have seen this test in the past, don't say anything to your neighbor, okay? Because some of you may have seen this. It's fairly old. But how many times have you ever started a class with a test? All right. I'm going to just let you watch the video and follow the instructions. I'm up there yet? You know, it really helps when the screen's plugged in. I'm like, gosh, I know I had this thing working. There we go. Let's try this one more time. All right. Count how many times, let me explain this one. Count how many times the player's wearing the white pass the basketball. And I want you to concentrate. You're going to see 6 people come out. 3 are dressed in white, 3 are dressed in black. Right? And they're going to be, the white team is going to be passing a basketball back and forth to each other, and the black team will be passing a basketball back and forth to each other. I don't want to know necessarily how many times the ball hits the floor. I don't want to know how many times they walk around each other. I don't want to know how many times they dribble the basketball. What I want you to count is the number of times the white team passes the basketball to another white team member. Got it?
So the bounce pass doesn't count?
Yes, if it's a pass, it counts. All right. All right, did you get it? Did you count the number of times? What kind of numbers did we come up with? 15. 14. 15. All right. Anything other than 14 or 15? 12. All right. It'll show you in a second. The correct answer is 15. All right. Did anybody see anything obvious or odd?
They weren't very good.
The gorilla. She saw the gorilla. Did anybody else see the gorilla? You got the 15 passes right. The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla? This is a rewind. He not only comes out there, he comes out there and goes. So evidently, most of you have not seen that video. Okay, now we can get to do what we came here to do. I saw that video actually at an ASHE event, and I was sitting beside a good friend of mine, and it was in an audience of about 6,000, as a matter of fact. There was 5,000 something there that day. And we were watching the video, and I looked at my buddy, I said, "What's the gorilla doing?" And he looked at me, he says, "Ain't no gorilla been up there." I says, "Man, there's a gorilla come across there." And then they showed it back like that, and everybody's like, wow. So, I mean, it's kind of a perception deal. And then what I use it for is, it's our lives. We get so focused on the things that we've got to do, sometimes we just forget the obvious. And when you saw it the second time, was the gorilla fairly obvious? Absolutely. And what we're going to talk about today with documentation and some education on how to maintain our generators is sometimes you've got to see the obvious. And you get so focused on getting the checklist and running around and doing things. And I'm going to show you some pictures up. It's actually some of Richard Knittle's pictures that are the obvious. And that's the whole point of the video is, you know, pay attention all the time. And sometimes you might learn something. Hopefully you will today. All right. First of all, I'll talk about a little bit of housekeeping issues. This is a very informal presentation, as you can see already. And this thing's going to drive me nuts today. Relax, have a little fun, have questions. As we're going through the presentation, if you see some slides or videos that are relevant to some things you've had experience with in the past, feel free to talk about them. We've got 2 hours to fill up, and the only thing between me and lunch, between you guys and lunch, is me. A break at 11 o'clock. All right. Please ask questions if you have them, like I said, you know, and not only ask questions, share a little bit of the experiences as well. Because in the room, I promise you, there's a vast amount of experience when it comes to working on generators and other issues relative to maintaining buildings. All right, pagers and phones. We have a room set up outside. If you need to have a phone call or a conversation, we understand. All right, there's probably not a person in the room that doesn't have a cell phone. Right? And something may happen at work. You may need to talk to your family. Please just step out the door, and when you go out, go to your right, and there's a room you can have some privacy if you'd like, or otherwise just stay in the hallway. But if you would, go ahead now and put your cell phones on vibrate or silent, whatever you want to do with them, just so we won't bother your neighbor. Because trust me, it won't bother me. I'll keep on talking. All right? No questions. I always like to use this statement. If you were at the last seminar, you heard it as well. No questions to me is going to mean one of two things. The first option is you really don't care what I'm talking about. Because I don't think anybody in the room has seen every bit of this and knows the whole realm and the way that we like to look at documentation and some of the slides and the pictures. And so it should be at least of some interest to you. All right? So if you don't have any questions at all, that means you don't really care about what we're talking about. You just came here because the boss said you got to go. All right? How many came here because the boss said you got to go? Come on, be honest. All right. The second option, if you don't have any questions, is quite obvious. I'm doing such a great job that you don't need to ask any questions about it because I'm giving you all the information. Work? That's probably not going to happen. For those of you that have been to your facilities, you pretty much know that that one's not going to happen. All right. In this discussion today, we will be outlining the basic documentation requirements for your emergency power needs. I've set this up, and you know, as Mark indicated, I come from the healthcare background. I'm kind of the healthcare guru. But this applies to everyone. I know we got some property management people out here. You have some of the same similar documentation requirements. When we start talking about NFPA and some of the others, you have to run your generators. You're required to have documents. And we're going to cover some fairly good detail about NFPA 110 Chapter 8. And that particular section applies to everybody in the room. So it's not going to be just on healthcare. It's going to be on documentation as a whole and the expectations that the governing bodies and the authorities having jurisdiction have when they come to your facility. All right? When they come up, they're going to want to see certain things, certain types of documents, certain lengths of documents, certain ages of documents, certain time frames. And we're going to talk about all those. And that's what the whole session is about. All right? Items to be covered, we're going to talk about the engine and what you have to do to it, manufacturer specifications, etc. We're going to talk about the generator itself, and there is some required maintenance on that item as well. And you've got the one that turns it and the one that produces the power. Both of those entail a little bit of maintenance. If you just leave them alone, they will fail on you. And that's what we're all about here at Prime Power, is keeping those things running for you. All right? Power distribution, after you leave the generator, it hits out into the distribution cycle, and we'll have a little bit of maintenance issues that we need to look at that for inspection purposes and making sure that things are maintained. Using check sheets and logs. Boy, I'm going to wear that one out today. How many of you in here use some type of check sheet or log when you're doing your generator? That should be in everyone. All right? We have them here at Prime Power. I use them for my inspections. Really, if you're going to do any type of maintenance and inspection on any item, with a generator or anything else that you may have, I heard someone talking about fire pump when we came in. If you don't document it, when the surveyors come in, you don't do it. And that's what they're looking at. Anybody disagree with that one? Yes, sir.
These check sheets, are these something
Yes, sir, and I'm going to give some broad ideas of what should be on the check sheets, and then I have our prime power check sheet that the technicians use, and it's also in the presentation. Now, you've got the presentation on a handout, and I didn't mention early on, my card is on every one of your areas. If you would like this presentation electronically, if you shoot me an email, or give me your card and just say email, write email on it, I'll be glad to email you this presentation, and you'll have our check sheet then. But the check sheet that's on the presentation is this one. If prime power is servicing your engine, you have seen it before. It's just one that I feel is really good because it goes into some pretty good detail. Good question. Thank you, sir. All right. Using powers of observation. We've got a few slides. Anyone in here come to Richard's last seminar in this room? All right. You're going to see the same pictures you saw then, because I didn't have any personal pictures of generators, so I robbed them from Richard. Hope it's not any of yours, but... All right. You can observe a lot by just watching. That's quoted by Yogi Berra. And that goes true. It goes back to the gorilla video. You were watching the basketballs. You were not watching for the gorilla. So, be keen in your observations, and that's something we're going to talk about as we get into the pictures. All right? Questions so far? A little bit of vocabulary. You've heard all these things, but we just put them up because we're going to talk about the prime mover, the generator, the automatic transfer switch, parallel operation. Is anyone in here, and be honest, we're amongst friends here, not familiar with the term parallel parallel operations? All right? Good. Parallel, and we'll have a slide on in a few minutes, and the reason I was asking is I wanted to go into a little further detail on that if I needed to. All right, NFPA 110. Has anyone not heard the term NFPA 110? I'll be glad to show you where the door's at. All right. Governing bodies. We have to do maintenance on our engines and our generators for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is absolutely, most certainly, the right thing to do. We want to maintain our equipment. We want to be able to provide it a longer lifespan by the proper maintenance and documentation on it. But also, we have governing bodies out there that says we must do things. There are some shoulds and there are some shalls. There are some you wills. And each one of them has their own. In our world, there's a little bit of tie-in between a lot of the surveying bodies, the state coming in, NFPA 110, the State Fire Marshal's Office, and then the Joint Commission. And all of these are governing bodies for us. Occasionally we'll have OSHA show up, hopefully not because of we've done something, but that's really about the only time you ever hear from them. EPD, usually when they show up, we've done something bad. Anytime you have any major fuel leakage and etc., EPD gets involved on the generator side, and that's why I've got them listed here. Joint Commission, for you non-healthcare gurus, the Joint Commission is the accrediting body that governs healthcare, and they are a deemed status organization that allows hospitals to receive a type of accreditation. And without that accreditation, they're not able to receive Medicaid, Medicare insurance benefits, and for hospitals, that's usually about 60% of their income. So if they don't pass these folks, well, then they don't get to make it. All right? Then you've got the NEC that tells us the way to do things. And, of course, the all-important authority having jurisdiction. Now, this particular governing body is different for different people in the room. All right? Some of you, the authority having jurisdiction is the State Fire Marshal. From what I understand, I think it's DeKalb County. They got their own way of doing things. And some others around here. The important factor about the authority having jurisdiction, and my word of advice to you, is find out who that individual is, whose office. Not the person that thinks they are, but the person that really is. The person that can shut you down. The person that can fine you. Sometimes to you, your AHJ may be your boss. But generally speaking, in the state of Georgia, the State Fire Marshal is very powerful. Dwayne Garris is his name, and he usually has the authority to come in, and regardless of whether you're a property management or healthcare, if you have life safety egress components on your system, Dwayne can have some say-so on it. So that's just a good one to keep in mind. All right. Do what we say, not what we do. Anybody got it wired like this? You know, I looked at this slide, and again, it's Richard's, and I just wasn't really sure if I could follow it or not. But this is what you call a natural mess, and we don't want to see these types of things, and I promise you, you don't want these types of things at your facility. All right? Yes, sir.
Why would the utility company allow that to happen?
You know, well, that's the thing, and you look at it.
That was at the authority having jurisdiction.
That's the whole point. Do what we say, not what we do. Who did this? The utility company. But if we tried to do that, oh my goodness. You know, if I tried to do that with just a regular old 110 circuit or 120 circuit, I'd probably be blowing things up. But that is scary when you. I actually sat and studied that slide for a minute or two when I looked at it, and you know, you coming in off of this pole. You got feeds, and then feeds coming off of feeds right here and right here, just going back God only knows where. And then I don't know, is this two sets or one? It's hard to tell. So I don't think I've ever seen a utility that will do that, but obviously somebody did. All right. We were talking earlier about the parallel feed, and I wanted to take just a moment to discuss the basics of when it's coming in. This is kind of elementary, but I use this as a starting point, if you will. You got your normal power feed, transfer switch in the middle, utility feed, and your load on the end. Your generator is sitting there idle or not doing anything. All right? And that's the way we like for things to run. Occasionally, we have a problem, and this has to happen. Right? We've lost our utility feed. It's gone, and now we're running on generators. Right? That's the point in time when it's important to you to have had done that proper maintenance. All right? Because at any point in time, and as we well know, when thunderstorms come across our state, now I'm not very familiar with the uptime, if you will, around the Atlanta area. All of my time on your side of the fence, so to speak, has been in the Columbus, Georgia area, and I can tell you Georgia Power Southern Company was very, very good for us. I can count the number of times we had a major outage on one hand in the last 10 years that I was at the hospital I was at. So, but the thing is, you have to be prepared all the time. Nobody can ever predict. And think about the poor guys up in North Georgia, North Alabama a few weeks ago. You know, you never know when those things are coming. All right? Then you got the parallel feeding. This is usually a good time. Used to be more relevant because we did a lot of it. But now you don't see it as much. Parallel feed is when, by your option, you have decided that you want to supplement the utility's power coming in and actually lowers your electrical bill. Right? Now, for my purposes, I actually had that in a facility I was in, and we monitored the price every day by the hour, 24 hours ahead. And by that monitoring, we were able to determine what we wanted to run. We were on a rate structure that allowed us to turn our generator on and drop the load. We had a customer baseline that we were trying to stay at, and it was RTP pricing, and we were able to document about $100,000 a year saving by utilizing that. So there is some good services. But then the EPD stepped in and said, no, you can't do it in the Atlanta area. Then it made it not worthwhile for Georgia Power to do outside the Atlanta area, and our program got stopped too. So, but there are some good times for parallel feeding, especially when you get into the heat of the summer and you really start needing that around the state and around the country, actually. All right? That answers you. All right? And anytime we're covering something, like I said, guys, feel free to ask questions. If I don't know, Chip's in the back, and he'd be glad to take care of it for you. All right? Engine maintenance. We want you to always follow the manufacturer's guidelines. This is something that we do here. The technicians at Prime Power are factory trained, and we follow the manufacturer's guidelines. We also reference NFPA 110, and a little bit later in the presentation, we're going to get into some really good detail of NFPA 110, and I'm going to actually cover the chapter item by item. All right. Again, check sheet and log sheet. You mentioned earlier, is that something that we have, that somebody does? Those are all individual to the user. You know, some things may be more important to you than it is to one of these guys. So when you look at developing your log sheet, don't start from scratch. There's too many out there. Get a good one and then curtail it to you. I've developed one specifically for healthcare because there's some little nuances in the codes that are a little different about the running times and the times between, etc. So develop it for you. And we'll be glad, if you don't have one, I can assure you we'll be glad to help you out. All right? Use common sense and powers of observation. We're going to talk about that. We're going to have some pictures, some obvious things and some not so obvious things. Whenever you're doing your checks and utilizing your check sheet and walking around a unit, the idea is to use your powers of observation to look at, see what's different, what's wrong. All right? You should have a manual. All right? This is where you'll find your manufacturer's guidelines. This is what tells you how often you should change the oil, and you know it goes into some fine detail. One of the things in the NFPA 110 section, when we get to that, is talks about the number of copies of this that you have. You should have them available to you. Right? Things that are typically on a log sheet. Right? Now these are the types of things that, you know, I say typical. As we list them out, these items should be on all of your log sheets. Okay? So when you're looking at these and seeing these, kind of think about your own log sheets back at your facility. Make sure you have these things. And these are the obvious ones. They're not the ones that are out there and say, oh, I didn't think about that. Do you have to check the oil level every time you do maintenance on it? Absolutely. Why is that? Okay, in case you're losing oil, in case there's a fuel mixture with it, absolutely. You know, do you have the proper levels? Now, let me ask the stupid question. Would you start it if the oil level wasn't right? Absolutely not. So, you know, one of the first things and one of the obvious things you must do every time you do some maintenance to your engine, check the oil level. All right? Now, how many of you watch the oil level in your vehicle? Get it changed every 3,000, 5,000 miles, whatever. It's important. Why? What happens if your viscosity goes away or your oil level goes down? What happens? You burn your engine up. That is very expensive. So the oil's probably one of the, it's not probably, it is to me the key component. All right? The next one, check coolant level. We can get into the same conversation. Does your engine run long without coolant? Not around these parts. You know, it gets pretty warm, and you know, diesel engine needs to run at a certain temperature, and they need to stay warm so they can start, you know, fairly easy. Because if you try to cold start them without your block heaters, they're a little drag on the start. Right? They're designed to stay about 130 degrees and keep warm so they can start instantaneously at any point in time. But your coolant level is a very important factor. Right? You must have it, because if it comes on, you know, your block heater's got it running at whatever temperature your engine's set at. Within probably about 5 minutes, that rascal's going to start climbing. You know, when you get up over 200 degrees, things start happening. And if you don't have a proper coolant in there, that heat will continue to rise and you'll blow the engine up. Just real simple. So these, although they're the very simple basics, they are the necessities. All right. Walk around for obvious damage. Richard said it best, and I like the way that not only are you walking around looking at obvious damage, you have to use all of your senses. Right? If you smell something funny, when it's running, if you hear something funny, even to the point if you feel something funny, vibration can tell you things. So if you're the person running that engine on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, whatever you do, there will be some familiar sounds to you. And when you hear something outside of that familiarity range, something's wrong. So when you're walking around and doing your checks, you know, think about some of the things that we're going to show here in a moment, but think about, does it sound like it did last time? Is the engine shaking? All right? Is it hotter than normal? All those things are an indication that something is about to happen. All right? Inspect your fuel system. Number one, make sure you have enough fuel. All right? You should get your fuel analysis run on it on occasion, but the first and obvious thing is, do you have fuel and do you have it in the proper place? A little story about myself, and it tells you where I come from. I was 19 years old. I was working at Houston Sports Medicine Hospital in Columbus, Georgia. I was like the lowest maintenance mechanic you could find. As a matter of fact, I had just been promoted to a maintenance mechanic from a helper. And at that facility, everybody ran the generator when it come your weekly rotation. Well, the first time it comes up my turn to run the weekend, I have to run the generator. I'm scared to death. I mean, I tell you, like, I'm 19 years old. I'm fixing to push this button to fire this big old engine, which is one of the biggest engines I've ever seen in my life at the time. You know, I'm like, this thing could really power my truck if I put it in it. But, you know, I fire this thing up and everything goes, whoo, it comes up and runs, and I start making my checks, and I'm looking around, all of a sudden, whoo, like, well, you know, that's not right. I've not run this thing before. I don't know how it's supposed to sound, but I'm enough smart to know that it's not supposed to do that. So I go shut it off. But it has to go through its cool down, and the whole time, ooh, and finally, probably about 3 minutes into the cool down, it shuts off. That's not a good sign. I don't know what to do. I called my boss. My boss at that point in time was Mark Smith. Mark Smith came out. Took him 30 minutes or so to get there. He said, well, fire it up. I said, you fire it up. This thing that made me nervous. So he fires it up. So we fire it up again. And evidently, Mark's not a whole lot smarter than I am at this point in time. So he fires this thing up, and it doesn't fire up. And then it starts and goes right back out. Now, what was wrong? Some of you experienced guys probably already know what the problem was. Fuel. Absolutely. You know, I learned a lot that day. A little old, at that point in time, about $1.25 fuse. It's probably $7.95 today. The fuse that feeds that little 110 pump that runs that day tank, if it goes out, your generator won't run. So, fuel is a very important factor, and that was one of the first lessons I got when it comes to maintenance or running a generator is, you know, I had no idea. And today, when I survey facilities, I teach that. What is the obvious thing that can put you down? And we walk in the room and I say, okay, I just removed the power from your day tank fuel pump. What are you going to do? You can't. You've got to restore that power back. All right. Check belts. Got a pretty good picture of a belt, but this is something you need to look at on a routine and regular basis. Look for wear and tear, and we'll cover that one again in a moment. Inspect batteries. Same thing. Got a picture of that one too. Your batteries are the life, the startup of the engine. The life of that battery determines on how you maintain it. There's all types of batteries out there. You may want to change yours every 1 year, every 2 years. There's some 20-year batteries available. It just depends on what you're comfortable with. But the obvious thing between those changes is making sure that it's maintained properly. Right. Check block heater operation. I mentioned it earlier. A diesel engine needs to be of a certain temperature. And I want to say 130. Some of you might can correct me on that. I think it's about 130 to 150, something like that. That engine needs to set at that temperature, and the reason for that is on its startup, it's already warm. That oil's already warm. It can already flow. And it helps you out a whole lot on those quick starts. All right. Checking oil pressure. Once your engine is up, you've got to maintain a certain pressure. If you don't have that pressure, of course, it's obvious that oil's not getting through the engine. All right. Frequency and voltage, absolutely. Just because it's running doesn't mean the generator's putting out. And we're going to talk about that again in a moment or two. All right. Maintain your records. You can get as deep or as simple as you like on your maintenance records. There are some obvious things that you must have. There are some things that you've got to have, the shalls, if you will, that you've got to maintain. The idea behind this slide, keep it simple and then look at your suggested maintenance logs and schedules. You can get one from us. You can develop your own. You can get it straight out of the manufacturer's guidelines. Any place you got. The point to me, make sure you got a log. If I come in to do a mock survey of your facility and you don't have a maintenance log, I may as well go ahead and leave then, because you're not going to pass an inspection. All right. Questions? All right. Let's start talking about the carrying and observation of that. If you look around when you're walking around your generator, these are the simple things. All right, what is this? What's causing this right here? Leak. Now, that's a small item. If you're familiar with your engine and you're familiar with your system and you walk around on a weekly basis, you need to look for that level of detail. All right? When you're talking about the care and observation and the checking on the log sheet, this is a detail that you need to start looking for. Now, is this a big problem at this point in time? No. But will it develop into one? It could. Thank you. Absolutely. It may not ever develop into one, but it's a possibility that it could. This is a type of thing that, from the owner's perspective, what would you do with it? Keep an eye on it. Watch it. If it starts to grow, then of course you could do something with it. You know, if it stays that same, probably won't hurt a thing. Now, Richard Knittel might stand up here and tell you need to replace all that. And that's but really, that's the type of thing that when you find, you have to look after, and you have to watch a little bit and make sure that things are going to be okay. Now, when you can walk around an engine and spot something like this, then you're doing a very good job. That's what you want to do. That's what you want your technicians to do. Anybody that's going around and inspecting that engine, this is the level of detail you want to think. Now, sometimes you get the more obvious. I think anybody can see this one. All right? And when you look at this slide, I mean, the first thing you see is this is all bulged out. You've had some obvious leaks. But look back here. This problem is not contained to here. This is just, you know, it's past a little bit of maintenance due on this one. All right? You know, we were talking about earlier, I asked you what was going to happen with that little bitty leak. You said something might happen. What about this one? It's happening. It's already happening. So this is the point in time when you're doing your inspections, and I mean, if you are new at a place, you've just gone in and taken a job over, for example, and you walk out and you inspect your generator and you see this, you know you got some issues you got to deal with. You've got to start talking and teaching to the technicians about, you know, these are the types of things we can't let go. A lot of times you'll hear, well, we don't have the funds. Everybody have that as a problem sometimes? You know, and you run across that, and that's just things you have to face, and that's the point in time where you get to that next level, whether it be the CEO, COO, CFO, supervisor, whomever, and if they can't give you the funds for something like this, you walk them down there and say, you need to see this. This is going to blow. When this happens, what goes along with it? All right? This is not going to run. You're not going to have any emergency egress lighting, whatever the case may be for the situation. And explain to them that, you know, I don't know what this would cost to fix, but not a lot of money. I don't know what the root cause of this is, and it may be more expensive, but just to change out these things that you see is not a whole lot of money. So, you know, get the attention of those. And sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words. So when you have those things, you can take the picture. You know, I don't know what kind of relationship you have with your superiors, but, you know, I've always tried to have one with mine in the past where I could walk them down. And they may not understand what that generator does, but when they see something like that, they understand that that's not going to last long. I used to have, matter of fact, one of my favorite bosses I've ever had, senior vice president of patient care. She was a nurse. Sweet lady, still stay in contact with her today. And I did a few things like this. With her, I'd say, you know, Debbie, just let me show you this. And after 3 or 4, she said, listen, you're the expert. You just tell me what you need. And I was fortunate we had the money. You just tell me what you need, and we'll move forward. You don't have to show me these things anymore. But what had I done with her? I convinced her. I had built up a relationship. I had gained her respect that I wasn't going to come up there for no jokes. You know, if I came up there and said I needed X dollars, there was a genuine reason behind it. So you got to build that trust, and you got to build that relationship with your superiors. All right? And then some others that come along look like this. Now this one, I believe it's a little more than obvious. This one, and I've heard Richard talk about it, when you walk in, you smell it. I mean, fuel was blowing, you were burning fuel up on top. You know, that's just one of these things that it's time to shut down and fix. All right? This engine was running, by the way, from what I understand. But there are some, you know, more, when you back up and look, this is a failure about to happen. This is a failure. You know, it did happen. This engine would still run, but if you were to run this engine for very long, you could find you at least a head, if not some cylinders. And that's when you get into the really, really big dollars. All right? When you inspect batteries, look for these types of things. Now, what's the probability of that thing not cranking next time? Pretty good. You know, and that's a simple fix. That's a maintenance issue. Take them off, clean them up. You know, that battery's probably ready for replacement. But in the immediate need, until you get that new battery in, clean those terminals up. There's all kind of things out there, little brushes, and, you know, the old trick. Coca-Cola does a great job, you know, to help clean those things up. So don't leave your batteries like this. Your generators are very important. Your generators are there for usually, and I don't know that all of yours are, but generally speaking, for life safety. Meaning it's there to protect people to either get out of the building or protect them until some others get there. So keep that in mind. That simple issue, which is, you know, I wouldn't say that's poor maintenance, I'd say that's lack of maintenance. That does happen. When you let a battery sit for a little while, that is the only thing anybody did wrong to get to this situation is not take care of it before it got that bad. All right? A little grease on top would have helped prevent it a long time ago. But once you start it, it's going to grow. So you've got to stop what you're doing and take care of those things. Remember the gorilla? Some things you just see every day over and over, and they're just so obvious that they need to be fixed, and this is one of those type things. All right? We talked about belts. All right? What's wrong with this belt? Man, it looks good from here over. All right, the alignment is going, and you know, is this belt going to last very long? No, not at all. These are types of things that do need your immediate attention, or it will cause a failure. All right, what is this? Wet stacking. Absolutely. All right. Anybody not familiar with the term wet stacking? All right. Wet stacking occurs when you have unburned fuel that sits on top of the engine. Right? Or you've got some other things that's going on. Make a long story short, this is a bad sign. Anytime you have a diesel engine that's smoking like that, something is going on. When you run an engine unloaded, if you fire your engine up and let it run for so long and there's not much of a load on it, this will occur. Because it doesn't need all the energy to turn that generator, so it's got some unspent or some unburned fuel that'll get up on top of the block, and this is what happens. There's some conversation going on here lately about the weekly runs. And let me just do a little quick survey. Anybody in the room run their generator weekly? Right. For more than 30 minutes? More than 15 minutes? More than 5 minutes? All right? See, as you notice, I did that because we got all kinds of answers. Caterpillar has just recently come out and said that a weekly run should only be for 5 minutes. All they want you to do is test that rascal out. The thing is, when you're doing your weekly test, you're testing the starting components of the system. So keep that in mind. Some of you may have other reasons that you're running them the longer, and everybody has their own. And I'm not going to tell you that from Prime Power says run your engine 5 minutes, because that's up to you. But the idea behind a weekly test is so that you can see that that thing starts. The starter works. It comes up to temperature. It comes up to amperage. And that's all you need to do.
What is Joint Commission's requirement?
There is no requirement for a weekly test from Joint Commission at all. Monthly, yes.
Most manufacturers is up to when it reaches peak temperature.
Yep.
And, you know, for longer reasons, too, you know, sometimes 5 minutes.
It's not long enough.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you don't...
I don't know of a manufacturer out there that won't say, get it up to temperature. That's kind of the key thing. Get it up, let the thermostat open, and whatever time frame, that's why I said I wouldn't tell you a specific time. That may be 3 minutes, it may be 15 minutes for your engine. That's up to you to figure out. But the idea behind it, making sure it gets up to temperature and everything transfers. I mean, everything the generator is producing.
Okay,
And that's the intent.
on your insurance underwriters, they like you to follow NFPA.
Mm-hmm.
Example, and isn't NFPA saying 30 minutes runtime? Or
Monthly, not weekly.
Monthly loaded.
Monthly. Yeah.
monthly loaded?
The weekly's not always loaded.
Weekly's not always loaded.
Ours is.
Yeah. And here's another thing, and I'm going to say this one as a rule of thumb. If you're not running 30%, run that engine as short a time as possible. If you're running 30%, it doesn't matter how long you run it in.
Now, we also talk of diesel fire pumps as well as the...
Yes, sir.
The electrical jet.
The diesel fire pumps, the requirement for them is 30 minutes weekly.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Diesel fire pump.
Yeah, for your diesel engine, for your generator, there is no requirement for a weekly run. It's a manufacturer guideline, it's a manufacturer recommendation, and it's a good practice, but it's not a code.
Okay, so we're still 30 minutes weekly on the fire pump.
30 minutes weekly on a fire pump.
Stay within NFPA.
That is correct.
Underwriters, da-da-da-da-da.
Do you have a relief valve and spend a lot of water when you do that?
Yes.
Yeah. And there is talks, and this is not official. Matter of fact, I'm going to talk to somebody in a couple of weeks about it when I see them. There's people out there that are trying to get around and get that code changed.
Well, that's what I heard because of the price of fuel.
Yeah,
and,
yeah. They're saying it's just some of the gurus and experts in the country out there are saying that's not a complete necessity, and it will be coming up in the future NFPA classes or not classes, discussions. And one of the individuals that I know personally is on NFPA 110, and that's who I'm going to talk to about it because there's still quite a few of those out there. I used to have one, and it was 30. And a little quick funny story on that one. I put on to say that I didn't want to run this thing weekly, but by code I had to, and I was trying to put together documentation to provide evidence to change it to an electric fire pump. All right?
15 minutes.
Yeah. So, you know, I've got a 6-inch pipe with a 6-inch relief valve, and I'm not smart enough to calculate how much water this thing's running. So I started asking some people, and I asked a few engineering friends, and finally I called the engineer that we were using from the architects up in Omaha, Nebraska. He says, I don't know, I'll get back to you. He called me. He says, Terry, you're a pretty smart fella. I said, no, not really. He says, you know this answer? And I says, no. And let me remind you, I had been looking for this for about 2 weeks. He said, I'm going to ask you one question, and then you can think about it and get your answer. He said, actually, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. I said, okay. He said, what is the GPM rating of your fire pump? I said, 1,500. He said, okay, 1,500, not a problem. He says, can you flow at 150 PSI, 1,500 gallons per minute through a 6-inch pipe without it being restricted? I said, yeah, easily. He says, well, then there's your answer. I'm like, well, duh. It's running 1,500 GPM, 6 inches, not enough to restrict it to below that, and I'm running it for 30 minutes. That's 45,000 gallons of water, guys. So I put the calculations on that, how much I was paying for water, which I was also having to pay for sewage because of the way it was run, and then I was able to show that that thing would pay for itself in about 3.5, 4 years, something like that. So,
Switching to electric.
and switching to electric.
Diesel fire.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you said a minute ago that NFPA 110 says you got a monthly 30-minute run on load.
As long as it's above 30%.
Right, they want you to run it at 30%. For a generator,
Right.
NFPA says, and we'll see it, I'm going to actually show you the code in a minute, monthly for 30 minutes at 30%.
At 30%.
At 30%.
If your load's greater, then that's more the better, right?
The more the better. If your load's less, then there's some nuances you can get around with running it for less time, and that's when you got to run the load banks and all that
Now,
stuff.
the weekly 5 minutes, we do that. It's like real quick, you got to log it.
Yeah, yeah.
Check everything. So that's
Really, I mean, on the weekly test, 5 minutes is kind of like just a round number, but enough time, realistically, you need to run it enough time to get it up to temperature. And then time to do your logs. Yes, sir, Chris.
Terry, doesn't NFPA 110 still say that if you don't make 30%, you still have to run for 30 minutes under available building load?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Monthly.
Monthly.
Yeah. Let's define monthly to weekly. And then you got to run the load bank, and we're going to...
Right. And did you say in the NFPA 110 on electric fire pumps it says how long?
No, electric fire...
No time limit.
No time on electric fire pump. It's a churn test on
Right.
electric fire pump.
Right. For the motor.
I thought it said something about running it 30 minutes under load after it reaches running temperature.
Actually, Chris has got it here. We can read it exact. If he can find it there.
Chapter 8 and everything.
It's in Chapter 8, yeah. But yes, you're right. The idea is to get it up to that temperature. Joint Commission's a little different. Joint Commission says you must run at 30%, period. And then Joint Commission also says your load bank must be at 30%. NFPA, there's a little difference. Did you find it, Chris?
That's why I figured you got different interpretations
Yeah.
there.
8.4.2, diesel generator sets in service shall be exercised at least once monthly for a minimum of 30 minutes using one of the following methods. Loading that maintains a minimum exhaust gas temperature as recommended by the manufacturer. under operating temperatures conditions and not less than 30% of the EPS nameplate KW rating. Or 3, if the engine cannot be loaded as required in 2, the engine shall be operated until the water temperature and the oil pressure have stabilized, and then the test shall be terminated before the 30.
There you go.
Shall be terminated before the
Word for word there. So you got a few options, so depending on where you are. You know what it's saying. Let me see that if you don't mind, Chris.
So if you get it up to temperature, you don't have to run it.
And here's the key.
Annual load bank.
And here's the key. Diesel generator sets in service shall. That's not a should. That's a shall. In other words, you have to do this. Be exercised at least once 30 minutes. Loading that maintains the minimum exhaust gas temperature as recommended by the manufacturer. And you can find those now. Under operating temperature conditions at not less than 30% of the nameplate. If the engine cannot be loaded as required in Section 2, the engine shall be operated until the water temperature and the oil pressure have stabilized, and then the test shall be terminated before the 30-minute time period. In other words, if you can interpret that all kind of ways. My interpretation, if you can't run it for 30 minutes at 30%, get it up to temperature, let it stabilize, and then you can cut it off. But then you're going to have to run the load bank.
Make sure you document.
Yeah, document. I love conversations.
Now, see, the way I understood it, even if you reach, even if you do 30%, and we run them weekly, every year you still have to do a 4-hour minimum load test, is what I understood from the Joint Commission.
No, sir. And I got the code for you, and I give it to you. Every 3 years, you have to run a 4-hour test. Every 36 months.
Okay.
If you don't make the 30%, then you've got to run the load banks annually, and actually we'll cover it 25%, 50%, 75%, but we start them at 30. Always running at 30. All right. Generator maintenance. We're going to show slides about what we were talking about. And somebody, I don't have a watch on me, so somebody let me know when we get close to 11 or something.
Get close in 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Do what?
5 minutes.
5 minutes till 11?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll cover a slide. Yes, sir.
We started doing, to comply with a 3-year thing, we just, instead of keeping up with it every 3 years, we just started doing it every year. There's nothing wrong with that.
We got several customers that run a 4-hour load bank every year, and that's I'm telling you, generators are made to run. They're not made to sit there. You're not going to hurt them by running them for that 4 hours. The other thing, too, since we're on this 36-month issue, I'll let you know this. You've got a monthly test, and then when we get into it, Joint Commission's got specific date guidelines that goes in there. On your 36-month, 4-hour test, the clock starts again every time you do that. So you've got up to 3 years later. There's not a specified time frame like 33 to 39 months. Once you run it for 36 months, within the next 36 months, you got to do it again. If you do it in a year, it just starts all over. So, I know. Same things on this slide, talking about the check sheet, common sense, powers of observation, all right? This is one of those obvious things. But if you notice, it's on a circuit board. You've got to open a cabinet to see this. Right. Some of you choose to do this maintenance and inspection and testing on your own. Some of you choose to hire contract companies. Either way, whomever's doing it, this is the type of things that you're looking for. Now, back to my question. Is this a failure at this point in time? Probably not. But the bug's going to have babies or something. I don't know. This is going to be a problem eventually. So, yeah. At least it's not like those, what do they call them, the cicadas that's out now. Have y'all been hearing those things? Oh, God. Yeah. I call them the little crickets from hell. If they come out of the ground, their eyes are red. Come on. Every 13. Some say 13, some say 17, but it's a long time. All right? Let me get through these and we'll stop. All right. Again, obvious, but these are the types of things you have to open a door to see, and something you may or may not want your technicians doing. I mean, I don't see the arc flash posted on this one, but... All right, this is where we'll stop since we're on to another session, and we'll take a little 5-minute, 10-minute break.
5-minute break, and I'll ring chimes to get you guys back in.
All right. I'm surprised I hadn't...
Basketball slides?
No. I got a few stories, though.
I want to see that grilling for the first time.
You know, and that thing was made in 1999. If you go online and just type in gorilla basketball, it'll pull up. And it was a psychology class that developed it. And then from that video, these guys have probably gotten very rich by doing other things such as that nature. And I've seen some of them. One of them, I don't know why, I guess because it's things I've probably done in the past. One of the neatest ones is there's two guys carrying a piece of plywood, one on each end. And out here in the middle, it's in a public street, someone starts an argument with a passerby for whatever reason. And the people with the plywood pass between the two people. And the person in the back is where he walks off with the plywood and somebody else steps in his place. And the woman would just continue to argue. The person just changed that she was arguing with, but she just continued right on. Not to say it's a woman probably, because they did it with me too, okay? But there's a bunch of good ones. I don't know why I like the gorilla better. Because to me, it's just, when you realize that there was a gorilla in that first video, you're like, wow, I didn't see that. All right, electrical distribution maintenance, same type of slide. We look at manufacturer's guidelines. We look at NFPA 110. We look at some of the same things. You've got, again, the engine, the alternator, generator, whatever you want to call it, prime mover, generator, and then you've got the electrical distribution. Same situation. Use your powers of observation. If you open a cabinet and it's full of mud, something is wrong. All right? If you open the cabinet and it's got all kind of debris in it, or if the wires are cut or anything of that nature, something is wrong. It's time to stop and back up and look. Now, again, this one, is this a major problem at this point in time? Probably not. But if it got mud in it one time, is it going to ever rain again? Is it ever going to get more mud in it? Is it going to fill up? Yeah, there's issues that goes along with that. So, you know, using your care and observation. Yes, sir.
I interrupt. This one was a big problem at the time because this was a contractor boring underneath the parking lot.
That's right. I heard Richard tell this story. So it was a new deal, and when they was boring, they got into it. So it was basically a new installation. So that was a problem. Now I've known some others like this that mud showed up at the same time the power went off, where it got cut. I had a friend that was working in a residential setting and was doing plumbing work and drilled through the main cable coming in. It got his attention when he did, and it was kind of obvious. But you know, we have mistakes, we have things happen. But regardless, when you see these things and you're doing your inspections and you see something odd like this, there's a root cause, and you need to stop and find out what that is. All right? Organization of documentation. I like to organize my documents in a specific way by the code or the standard. All right? If you're a hospital and you know Joint Commission's coming to see you, line the documents up from your inspections like they are in the code book. You know, I even tab mine out when I do them. But it makes it much easier on you when the inspector's in there and he says, can you show me? And you already got the next document for him. It makes a much easier inspection. And for you guys in the property management field, whomever comes by to do your inspections, sometimes it takes a little while to learn what they're looking for. But once you know, it's much easier for you when you organize them in a fashion that they can flow through easily. And that's what the whole slide is about. Making it easier on you. It's a little more work up front. But once you get that method established and the next time that surveyor comes in, oh yeah, you're good. Thank you very much. Don't you wish Joint Commission would do that? All right. Again, utilize the check sheet. Actually, mine will come up in a minute. But this is a check sheet that I had come up with for the Joint Commission surveys. And this one, basically, this is the way the standards are listed in the book. A little check sheet just to make sure you've got all the documents in. And it's on the slide presentation. And again, for you hospital guys, if you don't have this and you would like it, drop me an email or just give me your card and I'll send it. I'll send the regular file to you instead of the presentation file. All right, and that's it. Some little bits about this one, and for you non-healthcare guys, forgive me for just a moment because I'm going to preach healthcare for the next few minutes anyway. A little bit of differences for healthcare. When you run this generator, and here's the standard, It is EP4. Generators tested 12 times per year, not less than 20, and not greater than 40 days for at least 30 continuous minutes. In healthcare, for Joint Commission specifics, it's not monthly. It has to be further than 20 days apart and less than 40 days apart. And the reason for that is their standard, when they say monthly, means calendar reference. If you ran it on the 1st of the month, you don't have to run it again until the 31st of the next month. And that's greater than 40 days apart. So on the generators and the transfer switches, they do specify 20 to 40 days apart, not monthly. And that's the whole reason behind that. And a little different for healthcare on that one. All right? Same thing occurs. You must run it at 30% or meet the exhaust. Chris read the standard a few minutes ago. That is the exact standard that Joint Commission follows. All right? If you can't run it at 30%, can you make exhaust gas temperature? And we were talking earlier, how do you measure that? There's a lot of little specifics on that. It's not a good, reliable resource to check your engine by unless you have a temperature gauge in the correct place. Using a laser thermometer will not give you an accurate reading. There are specifics of where that temperature monitoring has to be, and if you don't have that capabilities, I wouldn't recommend using the exhaust gas temperature as your monitoring point. All right? Transfer switches, same applies. Greater than 20, less than 40 days. Right? You must test your transfer switches monthly. In NFPA, all of you should do that. Joint Commission, again, from the healthcare side, says the 20 to 40 day rule. The other thing I like to say and teach and inspect on this one is, how do you start that generator test monthly with your transfer switches? Somebody give me a process. So you got, let's pick number 12. You got 12 transfer switches. You start it with number 1 in January. Do you start it with number 1 in February? No. Why?
Because you want each transfer switch to send a signal.
Exactly. You want to test the capability of that transfer switch to send that signal to the generator to crank. Once the generator is already cranked, you are testing every time, every month, that they all transfer over. But if you don't rotate that, how do you know that one starts the system? And Joint Commission will look for that during your documentation as well. For you non-healthcare guys, it's still a great idea. You're not testing the component of starting that generator if you don't rotate your switches. So just every month, you know, it's very simple. Take a little magnet of some type and stick on the door of the transfer switch or the cabinet of the transfer switch. Start here, and next month rotate it to the next one, rotate it to the next one. At least it gives you an opportunity. There's no set guidelines on how often you must do that. My recommendation is just go all the way through the end and start again. Some of you may have more than 12 transfer switches. All right, that means if you just do a standard rotation, you're not starting that generator with that switch annually. That's your call for you to decide if you want to do that or not. There is no code requirement to do that. But you're not truly testing the switch if you don't. All right? Comment, questions on that? All right. 36-month, 4-hour test we've talked about numerous times. Every 36 months, you have to test your generator at 4 hours. All right? It'll say at connected load in NFPA 110. All right? It'll say at 30% in Joint Commission. They want you to use that 30%. All right? So you're not required to use a load bank. For the non-healthcare, you just fire it up for whatever it's on. For you healthcare guys, you still got to meet the 30%. So if you cannot, then the recommendation is to get a load bank. You know, sometimes, you know, when you look at the life cycle of your generator, sometimes it may be better off for you to add something like a chiller so that you can get that load up that you can shed off during an emergency situation. So those are things to look at and consider for the long-term effect and efficiency of your plant. All right. Failure means repair and retest. Again, Joint Commission standard. This was added in 2010. If a required emergency power test fails, measures were taken to protect the facility until the repairs are made. Everybody ever heard the term interim life safety measures? This comes into play. If you have your generator system fail, you've got to do something immediately to protect the people in there. You know, if you're a facility that has another one that has a backup, great. If you're a facility that only has one and your generator is not reliable to crank, you've got a problem. That's when you need to get a rental. You need to do all kinds of things. Then those are the types of things that Joint Commission will look for. You are required to add proper protection during those times of failure.
Terry, let me ask you a question. Say you have 3 or 4 generators. What we're concerned about mainly is life safety.
Right?
Or the highest concern, I should say. If you have a portable generator that you can move around from area to area because you do not have any redundancy, and you just check it, there is no code requirement on something like that as to how often it has to be checked, is there?
There is not in the way that you asked the question, but let me throw something in. If you have a portable generator hooked to your facility, then you have to follow the same guidelines. It has the opportunity to hook to it, and at a point in time you hook to it, then your testing begins. You know, that would be code-wise. Terry's opinion-wise, I'd test it the same as I test my other ones. Because if you're using it as a backup and you have the opportunity to use it, then it needs to be maintained as the same. But as long as it's not hooked to anything, nobody's going to look at it. But you.
The reason I ask that is because I have several hookups in the facility, and we rotate them around. But if it was a requirement per building,
no, it's not a requirement per building. It's going to be a requirement per that generator. And you know, again, not code reference recommendations wise, I'd keep the same level of testing on that. Because where they can get you, and I happen to know he's a hospital, where they can get you is not in the utility management chapter, in the leadership chapter, in the continuum of care. Equality of your care from all across the board. If all of a sudden you're without and you need that and you haven't maintained that, but you're depending on it to provide critical power and life safety power, you've not maintained it to do the job. So that's where they could get you. They always get you somewhere. They also get you an EC 1.1.1, which is that risk category standard. It talks about, have you addressed the risk associated with the maintenance and care of all, something like that, and if you're not maintaining it. So code-wise, no. Standard operation-wise, yeah, you need to really consider that. I haven't heard that one. Good question. Have y'all got a mobile?
yes.
Cool. All right. Back to this. If a required power test fails, hospital retest after making necessary repairs. And I say this for everybody, whether it's healthcare or not. If your system has failed, you've repaired it, you've put in a new battery, you've called prime power, whatever the case may be, it needs to be checked out before you turn it back loose. Because when you say it's ready, you are depending on the inhabitants of that building to have their life safety protected by that generator firing. What I mean by that, if the power goes off and it's a 5-story building, they've got to get out. If that generator don't fire, then you're messing with the components of the emergency preparedness system. So therefore, you have to test it. Very good idea to write on the document. If you do it and you've got a work order for it, you write on the document. If you have us do it, excuse me, if you have us do it, we should write it on the document. And it simply needs to say, system tested, ready for use. That simple.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, sir.
I used to be a former technician to work in the field, and I've been on the, working on generators before with the batteries failed. Went back, got brand new batteries, put them on, tested it. Battery that I brought back from the manufacturer was bad. So if I hadn't gone and tested, even though it was a brand new battery, the generator wouldn't fire.
Don't assume. Great point, Matt. You've got to fire that thing up and retest it. And now, I can assure you, 99.9% of the time, you all have done that. But have you documented that you did? This session is about documentation. You need to document that you've retested that system. And thank you for that. Similar situation with me. I had an air handler go down once because the belts went away. I had a brand new set of belts hanging on the air handler. His surgery air handler, I don't want it to be down very long. I put them on, I walk away, I get a call from surgery. It's hot. I just fixed the air handler. I go back up there, brand new set of belts had shredded. Wasn't because of the alignments, it was bad belts. So my boss, he says, okay, put another set on. That was my backup. I haven't had time to get the other one. today at that facility, in every facility I've ever been in, there's a set on the unit, there's a set hanging up, there's a set in the warehouse, and then there's a set at the desk. So always make sure when you learn things the hard way. So, but do test them. I mean, we know you're going to test them. That's a common sense issue. For your documentation purposes, make sure that you document down that you have retested and that the system is ready for use. All right. Where to go to get some more information? All right. These are some websites that are out there. And again, you have the presentation. You don't have to write them down. But these are some very good resources for you guys, and tells you where and how to get things. All right. There is all types of information out there. I mean, I know everybody in here is familiar with, you know, the internet access and Google and what you can find out there. Utilize that tool, guys. You know, seriously, probably 2, 3, 4 times a week, I'll get a call from one of our customers, and they just want to know a code reference or a code interpretation or what do you do if. And many, many times, now I admit I do know quite a few of them, but I'm not the know-all. I mean, by no means. You know, my best tool in the world right now is called a Droid, because it's got internet access. And I'll be on the telephone, and I've done this 50 times. Be talking to a customer on this one and pulling up information on this one. The internet is a very valuable tool, and I wanted to let you guys know, use that thing. You know, can you trust every resource out there on it? No, we know that. But, I mean, you've got some major, you know, these are good ones. So you can find something. You can go straight to NFPA. You can Google NFPA codes. Now, it's very difficult unless you got a subscription. You cannot get to the book and read the code. But there's so many forums out there and so many other publications. You can find it. Somebody called me yesterday, as a matter of fact. I was on the way home and wanted to know about, does it have to be a sealed flooring in a cath lab? And I said yes, and it's going to be in the AIA guidelines. I don't know exactly what it is. That's when I get home and look it up, I'll call you. 15 minutes later, I called him back and quoted him word for word, the code, the reference, and everything off of the internet. So they're out there. All right. Now we're going to get into kind of the meat of the presentation. We're going to talk about NFPA Chapter 8. This is NFPA 110 Chapter 8. All right? And these are just, it's not direct, as you can see, it's not direct word for word, but it's a question. And at Prime Power now, we're going around and doing a little bit of a survey for all of our customers, and we're trying to find out how many of you are doing things and not doing things. And that's what these questions are based on. But these have the code reference with them when you look at them on the slide, and that code reference you can go straight to NFPA 110, and it's almost word for word. But these are the types of things that you must consider. Routine maintenance and operation testing program shall be based on all the following. Where you find the information. All right? Do you have 2 sets of instruction manuals for all the components of the EPSS? Remember I showed the slide earlier? You need to have 2 sets. One with a unit, and then one outside somewhere stored elsewhere. That's not a recommendation. It's a code that you've got to have 2 copies. So if you don't have 2 copies, you should go out and go to the manufacturer or whomever and find and get that second copy. All right? Are the 2 sets of manuals on all level 1 equipment, one at equipment, one stored elsewhere? Same thing I just covered. Are special tools required for routine maintenance available on site and available for use when needed? All right? That one gets a little picky. It says special tools required for routine maintenance. All right? Number 1, are you doing the routine maintenance or are you hiring it done? All right? The idea behind that standard is if something happens and you need to do some maintenance, do you have the availability to do so at that emergency point in time? Simple things. What type of oil filter does it have on it, and do you have a wrench to take it off? Is there a special oddball nut and bolt that you got to have? Some type of odd socket. There may be an application where you can't buy a socket to fit something, and you've had to manufacture one. That's the specialty type tools we're talking about. It may be just a big old gigantic pair of channel locks. You know, whatever that specialty tool is for you, is you need to observe, you need to figure it out, and make sure that you've got them available on hand. Now, I was very fortunate in my last facility that I had the funds to do these type things, but the generators there, number one, I was in plus one. I had full capacity of one generator, and then I had another one back up. But through the years, I was able to add budget-wise. I could change the fuel filter on the fly. I had banks of fuel filters. I had banks of oil filters on the unit. You know, I was a little above normal and was fortunately able to do that. But those are the types of things that you need to consider for the long term of your system and when you get into emergency. So not just the tools, and we're going to talk about components again in a minute, but make sure that you've got those tools for something you may have to do. All right? Questions on that? All right. Next one, our manufacturer's recommendation spare parts inventoried in a secure location on site. Now, I talked with Richard about this one in detail not too long ago. If you look through your manual and you look at manufacturer's guidelines for recommended spare parts, they are probably going to give you a long list of items. All right. Some of you may say, well, I can run down to Napa and pick this up. All right. What Richard Canuta would tell you, and I use and quote Richard on this because Richard is our expert. I am not, okay, on these matters. They recommend that you have a couple of things. Can y'all tell me what they are?
Coolant, oil.
Chip, give me one. Chris, give me one. Fuel filters. You may can run down to Napa to pick your fuel filter up. If it's 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday morning, Napa's not open. All right? You may need a fuel filter. Remember we talked about earlier on, what's the first thing that can stop you from running? Fuel. So you need to have a fuel filter. And I'm not meaning to be commercialized. If we're doing your maintenance and you have a fuel filter, when we come in, we'll put yours on and give you the new one to put back in your stock. And so you need to rotate those things. All right? So you need to have a fuel filter. You don't have to buy it from us. If you can go down to Napa and buy it, great, you know. But our recommendation to you is have a fuel filter for your system, every one you have, on site right there where you can get access to it. Chris, what's the other one? Block heater. Why a block heater? You can't go to Napa and pick it up. All right? Block heater is something that can take you, that can literally give you some problems because of the time frame to obtain one. Now, does that mean we think everybody should go out and buy a spare block heater and have on site? Oh, we'd love to see one. And it's a recommendation because that is something that you can't go out and pick up routinely. So you got to consider it, and you got to run the risk on it for your own facility and what that is. Now, I'll give you a great example. There's 100 miles between here and home. How often did I fall to a temperature 100 miles south of here that I needed that block heater to be an issue? Very rarely. But in this area, you're at a location where that does occur. So the further north you go, of course, the more apt it is for you to make sure you've got one on site. And these are Terry's opinions, all right? Not Richard's and not the books. You've got to decide for yourself, and you've got to run that risk analysis on your own. All right? If you have any questions on them, we'd be glad to contact any of us, and we'd be glad to help you out.
Eric?
Yes?
Just a comment again, using Richard as a reference on that block heater, using your parts, his answer would be manufacturer's recommended guidelines.
Yep.
This is the very first thing that we're to follow.
It's going to say block heater.
You have to keep it up at a temperature of 130 degrees at all times.
Mm-hmm. And having a block heater that's gone out in the past, I've had that experience, and it is important. It is important to the life of your engine.
What is the temperature, 130 or 120?
I think it's 130. If I got a technician here that can tell me for sure.
When they set up the system at the hospital where we work, the gentleman with Yancey told me between 120 and 125 you can maintain it.
Mm-hmm. And see, mine at St. Francis, at St. Francis I had cats. At Houston I had cats. At Doctors I had Cummins, I think. Every one of mine was 130.
Yeah, because it seems like hard normal.
Yeah. So he said one. How about just a quick survey? How many's got them set at 120? 130? See, we're mixed. I mean, already. So, you know, whatever your manufacturer's guideline says is what I say you should follow.
And it also seems like when you were on that checklist before with the Joint Commission,
Mm-hmm.
they're the overseers of the hospital.
Correct.
And that's much different than, like, the site I'm on commercial.
It is, and they both follow the 110, what we're covering now. They both cover Chapter 8. Joint Commission adds a few things to it.
Yeah.
And that's why I was saying a while ago that I was preaching the health care for a few minutes.
And that's fine, because, I'm learning about that, but it seems to be much more, there's no gray area.
No. With the Joint Commission standards, they give you what you're supposed to do, and then they check to make sure you do it.
Primarily because in healthcare you've got,
I
and in
understand.
prisons you've
Yeah.
got people that can't leave.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the key.
When you're saving lives, there is no.
And that's what when I do healthcare classes, and he just said it best. People in healthcare can't get up and walk away, so their codes are a little more stringent.
Yeah, they can't run down the stairwell and across the street.
Yeah. All right. Has EPSS been maintained to ensure to a reasonable degree that the system is reliable? Are you doing maintenance on it? Are you documenting? What's the next one? Has a written schedule for routine maintenance and operational testing of the EPSS been established? They want to know if you've been maintaining it, but not only just if you maintain, are you maintaining it on a routine schedule? Are you doing those monthlies? Are you doing, if you're doing weeklies, are you doing them routinely? And again, this is straight out of NFPA 110 Chapter 8. You're required to have a scheduled maintenance. Now, you can choose that schedule. You can say it's every 3 weeks, whatever you want. But remember, as you're looking in NFPA, the shalls. You shall test this thing monthly at 30%. So that kind of gives you the guidelines on how you need to schedule your maintenance. For just to show again, because we are able to show, even in this small group, some differences. How many in here do only an annual maintenance? Now, how many? All right, we got a couple. How many do an annual and a semi-annual, or one minor and one major? A couple more. How many do it quarterly? There you go. See, we're across the board here. So again, up to you, up to your reliability factor. Do you have another one? Have you had issues in the past? Some of you may have some bad water or something. So you have to run that risk and decide how often you want to do that. We actually have a customer now who's requesting that we come out and give them a price for doing it monthly.
I have a couple.
Okay. Yeah, in data centers, it's odd. And I'm glad you mentioned data center. We talked about healthcare and lives, but we talk about data centers. Data centers usually have a little bit more money, and sometimes the cost to them is irrelevant, because if they go without that data center for a couple of minutes, they lose millions of dollars. So they'll spend the money to do that monthly to make sure to maintain that generator properly. All right? Is a permanent record of the EPS inspections, tests, exercising, operation, repairs available? The documentation. It's not just an idea that you got to keep this stuff up. There it is in the standards, in the codes, is a permanent record available for review. Now, you get into all kind of things about what the code says on time frames of record keeping. Generally speaking, you'll find that most codes will say 7 years on maintenance documentation. If you keep
permanent record, is that referring to a hard copy or keep electronic?
Now, and I can't say, because I haven't ever discussed that with NFPA, as a general rule, electronic copies are now available, but you must maintain a backup. In other words, you can't rely on one PC to have it. It either needs to be web-based or backed up daily, weekly, whatever, on a disk. You got to have a backup to an electronic. You can use an electronic, but you need to have a backup for it. Because what happens if that PC goes? You're toast.
You're saying on 8.3-34, back 7 years?
Yeah, I'm saying generally speaking, the term is set. When they say permanent, 7 years is what you'll find code-wise. On the generator, I would keep it for the life of the unit. There's most of the things, to me, anything that's directly related to life safety egress, I would keep for the life of the unit. Because you never know what idiot's going to come up with a lawyer 10 years from now and say something wasn't maintained. All right? Has a written schedule for routine maintenance and operation testing and transfer switch evident. Not only the generator, you've also got to do the same things with a transfer switch. The transfer switches are a major component of your electrical distribution on the emergency power side. You have to maintain them to the same level that you do the generators. All right? Questions? Has a written schedule for routine maintenance and operator testing of the paralleling gear evident? You may or may not have paralleling gear. If you do, and you're utilizing it, then you have to maintain it as well. It's kind of like the old thing is the battery backup lights in stairwells. Well, if you got emergency power in the stairwells, do you really need them? No. But if you have them, what do you have to do? You have to test them. You have to maintain them. If you have paralleling gear, you have to maintain it. All right? So either use it or decommission it. Right? Again, a critical component of the emergency power system. Is a permanent record of weekly inspections and maintenance of the storage batteries available? Right? This one is a requirement. You know, we were talking about differences in weekly runs earlier. Doesn't say weekly generator run, it says weekly battery inspection, doesn't it? So at least weekly, you have to inspect that battery. Now, when you look at this, some interpretation comes into play here. I know what he's thinking in the back already. Does this mean a visual inspection, or does this mean you got to run a test on it?
You got to run a test on it.
You need to check that battery. You need to check that battery with whatever means you have of testing. Generally speaking, standard batteries you need to replace probably every 2 years. That battery in 2 years is probably still perfectly good. Now, depending on your battery manufacturer and the type of battery you have, how often you've run it, there's a lot of things. But think about this. If you've got to rely on that generator to come on to save somebody's life, and that's what generators are usually for, or if you're going to lose the data, which is going to not only cost the company millions of dollars, but it's a career-enhancing opportunity for you when it doesn't crank. You want to make sure that that simplest component, that battery, is well maintained and replaced routinely. So, you know, there's many places to get the battery. Yes, sir, Mark?
There was also a discussion on earlier about spare parts.
Uh-huh.
The proper tools, excuse me. A discussion came up amongst us internally that it could possibly be important to have. They're going to do battery inspections
Mm-hmm.
such that they should have
Proper PPEs, proper testing components. You know, you can't just go popping caps off batteries and sticking the thing. You know, that's where remember that OSHA slide back in. They'll get you on that one. So yeah, proper tools, and that could simply be, you know, the proper tools. Thank you, Mark, for bringing that up. All right. Is a permanent record of annual inspections of the fuel quality by ASTM standards available? You're required to do an annual fuel analysis. All right? Now, the idea on the fuel we'll go ahead and talk about for a moment. You've sometimes got these humongous tanks out there that you'll never burn up in 3 or 4 years. Very important to do that fuel testing. Now, if you're running through and replacing that fuel, you only got a 500-gallon tank, you're using 700 gallons a year, then there's not much you need because the fuel is less than a year old. So again, you have to run that risk analysis yourself to determine. If you keep fuel in your tank for over a year, you need to run that test. All right? The only way that you could not get that is if you could show that it got filled up less than a year every time, and then have the date of the fill when it was done and say that it's not a year old. But then you got Barney Fifes out there. Barney Fifes, those people to me, got one bullet and they're going to use it. They says, okay, you filled that tank up 6 months ago. What was the level of the tank when you filled it up? If you can't say 0, then guess what? You better have that fuel tested, because say, oh, it's 20%. Well, then 20% of that fuel needs to be tested. So again, that annual fuel requirement, there's just really no way around that one. All right? So unless you're just emptying that tank and refilling it. All right? Permanent record available at EPS has been inspected weekly. All right? Again, kind of like the batteries. Inspected.
If you're doing weekly tests, all this can be included on
All this can be included. Absolutely. If you're doing a weekly test, you are inspecting the batteries. You're inspecting the unit. You're walking around, doing all those things we talked about earlier. Is a permanent record available that EPSS has been exercised under 30% load monthly? We read the code direct earlier. There's 3 options there. Do we need to cover that one again? There was quite a bit of confusion on it. The idea behind this standard is that you've got to run this generator. They want you to run it monthly. They want you to run it 30%. If you cannot meet that 30%, then you have the other options to go by. But they're looking. And to jump back and talk a little bit about the healthcare side, as I mentioned earlier on the slide back when it talks about the 30% monthly run to 20 to 40 days, here's the difference. NFPA says monthly. It's still the same code. 20 to 40 days is monthly, any way you look at it. What the Joint Commission surveyors will do, and I happen to know on the property management side and the industrial side, if point in time you get inspected by the state, they're going to follow the same code. And what they want to see is 12 months worth of data that this generator has been tested. They're going to look the date, they're going to look to see what the load was, and they're going to look, there needs to be some type of time marking on your sheet. You can have on it the time it started and the time it stopped. You can have on it what the hour meeting was at the beginning and what the hour meter reading was at the end. And I have personally found people that had hourly meeting marks that changed from run to run. You know, a little pencil whipping going on. The inspectors that are out there has got enough sense to look at that time stamp. You know, one of my favorite questions to ask when I'm doing that survey is, okay, you have 312.2 and then you have 312.8. What's the 0.2 and the 0.8? So I answer me. What does the 0.2 mean? 2/10 of an hour. You'd be surprised at people that says, well, I don't know. It's 2/10 of an hour. What's a tenth of an hour?
6 minutes.
6 minutes. Had you thinking on that one, didn't I?
I answered the first one.
6 minutes. So if it started at 0.2 and went to 0.8, that's 6 ticks. 6 times 6 is... Now, see, I had to figure all that out as an inspector. I'd rather just say it started at 10 and cut off at 10:35. It's much easier. But there are people out there in your positions that are actually doing that testing that can't tell you a tenth of an hour. And that's you need to know that. You need to know, when you're putting a reading down on an inspection sheet, you need to know what it means. You need to know what the time frame is. When I developed the sheet for the healthcare side, there's a check mark on it. Was it 20 to 40 days apart? Did it run at 30%? You know, whatever those numbers are. Another good idea, in talking about 30%, on your inspection sheet, what is the kW load of that generator, and what is 30% of that load? Otherwise, the inspector's got to get a calculator out. And every time he has to get a calculator out and he looks stupid, he's getting mad, okay? But think about those. When you're developing your check sheets, the information that they are looking for, whomever the inspector is, whether it be state, city, local, national, whatever the information that they are trying to obtain, make it easy for them to get off of your sheet. Have a spot that says what time you started that generator and what time it shut off. Have a spot that gives that hour meter to coincide with that time run. And if the two don't match, there's issues. And I found them where they didn't match. All right? That's falsification of documentation, and that's, like I said earlier, a career-enhancing opportunity. So your documentation is very important. Now, I'm getting into this one a little bit. We talked about how important the documentation is and how important the maintenance it is. I happen to be one of the individuals that went down to a place called Lindy Boggs Hospital in New Orleans. Anybody ever heard of it on the news? All right. Lindy Boggs was the hospital that during Katrina that the generator did not fire, and some people died, and there were some lawsuits on it. And I happened to be doing some work at this facility, not during that time. It was afterwards. I was going down to clean it out. But the attorneys showed up at the facility. This is 2 years later. There's this lawsuit going on. And I tell you the funny part about that, I'm outside just kind of checking things out, seeing what we want to get and what we don't. And one of the attorneys asked me, you know, who I was, what I was doing, and I told her, you know, talked to her for a minute. And she said, well, let me ask you something. I said, oh, wait a minute, because she didn't tell me what she was doing. I said, I'll be glad to answer anything you want me to answer, but you can't have my name and write it down, because I'm not going to court. And the question was, why do you think these generators fail? All right? And there's a story to the documentation in a minute. But I'm standing in the mechanical room, in the powerhouse, with the attorney. There's 3 or 4 of them, and I got a few guys with me. And I says, ma'am, I don't mean to be blunt, but look around. I said, you see that dirty stain line about a foot from the top. She said, yeah. I said, that would be where the water, my perception is, that would be where the water flooded in, and then as everything went down, it sat for at least 24 hours and caused that stain line before it was pulled back out by the tide. But this comes from Pontchartrain, not from the ocean. So I'm not really sure this time frame. I'm no expert. But what I am an expert in is that line is above that generator. It doesn't run. There's no way. So she asked me, at that point in time, she asked me, well, do you think they had documentation on this? And I says, ma'am, I'm not familiar with this facility, but I can tell you from a hospital perspective, as they are required to be inspected by Joint Commission every 3 years, they have the maintenance logs on this generator. And it wasn't their fault that this generator didn't crank. That was why the generator didn't crank. And what that was worth to them, I don't know. They were trying to get the money, so they probably didn't like my answers anyway. But, I mean, even at that stage, 2 years later, a lawsuit going on, the attorney asked me, do you think they have documentation on this? So everything is important. If you don't document it, you don't do it. When your surveyors come in and they want to know what you've done for your monthly test, what the procedure is, you can tell them all day long. If you can't show them, they don't believe you. You didn't do it. You didn't do it. All right. Systems that do not meet 30%, this is where you get into the load bank. And the standard says 25%, 50%, 75%. Word of advice. If you're going to use that annual load bank for your 4-hour test, or if you're going to use that 4-hour test for that annual load bank, and they supplement each other, all right? What is wrong with this verbiage?
That's not for 2 hours, right?
For the 2 hours, your annual test is required to be 2 hours. And then when you read the verbiage, it says 25, 50, and 75%. But what's wrong with that if you want to use it for a monthly run?
Not 30.
It's not 30. And I don't know why in the world in FPA they say 25% on a load bank. And the idea was so you could start that thing up and get it to build up, you know, and that's, I mean, it makes sense. But when you read, and it only applies if you want to use that run for another test. Just be careful. All of your load banks, as a recommendation, should start at 30%.
Why they reduce it to less than 2 hours?
Now that's your no, that's 2 hours. 30 minutes, 30 minutes, and 60 minutes.
Reduce it to less than that.
2010
Yeah.
edition was less than 2 hours incident green.
Yeah. But they haven't adopted it yet.
Okay.
So that's why. When the 2010 is adopted, it is less than 2 hours. So, you know, and I'll tell you, from the state perspective, God only knows when they'd adopt 2010. Okay? All right, so, I mean, I can tell you, Eric Houghton, state architect, adopted the 2010 AIA guidelines in February of 2011 when he went to Ashley's class that I taught.
Comply with the new code that they haven't adopted. Are you in violation?
Yes.
Okay.
Until that code is adopted, you have to stay with the old. Unless it's more stringent. You could run it more than 2 hours and be okay.
Right.
But because 2010 says less than 2 hours, until it's adopted, you still got to run 2 hours. All right. Does permanent record also include cold start testing? This doesn't mean, and I'm going to tell you up front, this is my opinion, this does not mean without the block heater. All right. This means starting from scratch. In other words, what they don't want you to do, the intent of that standard, they don't want you to fire this thing up, let it get hot, and cut it off, and then do your monthly test. They want you to cold start it from scratch without having to, you know, in other words, fire it up, put the load on it. That's what they're after. When it fires, the load goes. That's the cold start portion. All right? Yes, sir.
How do you document that?
How you start the time frame when if you're doing your readings and you fired at 3:30 in the afternoon and you take your first reading at 3:32 and it's got a load on it, that's documentation enough. Unless you wanted to put a start on it that it was, you know, this was my cold start test.
Running at 3 o'clock.
You can't. I mean, you can look at the meters and time and, you know, you could what if it to death, but generally speaking, the records that you've got from a month to month run is acceptable that you're doing on that regular schedule. I've never gone back and asked anybody for this one, and I don't. Has anybody from an inspection standpoint ever been asked to prove that?
I don't know what cold start testing is. I hate to be stupid.
Well, that's what we were saying. What cold start test is just starting it up and putting a load on it. Not starting it up, letting it warm up, and then putting a load on it.
It's lost of utility.
A loss of utility, what's the word I'm hunting? Simulation, thank you. A loss of utility simulation.
Open up normal power today.
Yeah. That's your cold start.
What's the frequency of that required?
No, actually,
It can't be monthly.
no. Will you look, Chris? I think it's annual, isn't
We
it?
only do it once a year.
Yeah, I think it's annual.
Okay.
Chris is going to look it up for me.
10 seconds.
Load 8.4.
Yeah, kind of.
8.4.4, load test of generators load test of generator sets shall include complete cold starts. 8.4.5.
Doesn't give you a time.
No. 8.4.5 says time delay shall be set as follows.
Yeah.
It says time delays.
Doesn't specify, which is kind of odd. They usually do. I would say on your monthly.
Opening up normal today.
No, not opening up normal. Transferring over. The intent there is people in the past that have fired a generator up for their monthly purposes and wait to put a load on it.
Okay.
Don't wait to put the load on it. The cold start means fire it up, transfer the load within 10 seconds. Your transfer test.
If you do the push button on the ATSs I got,
Then it's doing it automatically.
Yeah, but it's not in 10 seconds. It's elevators are lowering, time delays and all that stuff. It can be 30 to 60 seconds.
You don't have them synchronized.
No, they're working.
Yeah.
They're working. It's all working good. It's just doing, because it's not a real outage and a loss of normal power, we don't want to, be failing a bunch of elevators if they happen to be in motion at the time.
We're going to get to one in a minute that talks about an annual test of the breakers.
So we did the annual cold start, what I call it.
And I think what you're referring to is going to be this annual breaker test where it is an actual simulation. It's not a simulation. You actually cut the normal off. Yeah. And that will cover it. But it doesn't specify in the code. He just read it. Monthly, annually, what have you.
Yeah, but still a little confused on it. I'll have to do some.
We'll talk a little bit too. All right. And there it is. Is a permanent record available that low voltage circuit breakers are exercised annually? Circuit breakers above 600 volts are exercised every 2 years. I'm not going to survey you because you might not want to give this answer, but I bet you half of you in the room don't do that one. I can tell you from a hospital perspective, I never done that one. And I won't do it until somebody makes me do it. But it is an NFPA code, and it is recommended. All right? And the idea there is if you don't ever test them, when are they going to fail? It's not if they'll fail. They'll fail one day. That'd be 50 years, but,
That's just exercising. Does it talk about doing injection testing?
No, not in here.
Is
But
that going to be a joint commission requirement?
I doubt it because hospitals, I don't think, I can't speak for George Mills and all the cohorts up there, but I doubt you'll ever see that. Terry Parish's opinion. I doubt you'll ever see that in Joint Commission because of the patient safety issue. They don't want you to go in and cut stuff off when you got patients in the hospital. Whereas in NFPAs, after testing the equipment, they want you to test the equipment. And in Joint Commission, they put that life safety a little bit above that.
We've actually had old breakers in certain part of the hospital that was built in 71. That when the breaker tripped, you have to pull the covers off the breaker to reset it.
Yeah.
So it was like, that's a no-no.
I actually wrote a hospital up once because if the power went out, it was in a 50-year-old ground fault switch, and it took 4 people to reset it. They didn't have staff at 4 people most of the time.
Yeah, I actually had to take a drilling tool and cut the top of the breaker where the handle would actually go far enough
until you get up in there. All right. Is a permanent record available that EPSS every 3 years has run with 30% connected load for 4 hours? There's your 4-hour, 36-month test. Time, man? Here's our check sheet that I was referring to. That's the one that Prime Power uses. It's on the presentation. You guys probably have it already. See, y'all thought I was going to be long-winded. We have learned to use check sheets as a prompt and guide to aid our powers of observation. Utilize those check sheets, all right? Take ownership and responsibility for the safety and reliability of this life-saving equipment. You guys are in the position to maintain these systems and keep them up, all right? And I love using that term. When you have a failure, sometimes they happen. But if it's due to improper or poor maintenance, it is very likely a career-enhancing opportunity for you. All right? That is the end of the presentation.